Our next speaker, it's really a pleasure for me to introduce, is Dr. Sylvain Calinon, currently head of the Robot Learning and Interaction Group at IDIAP Research Center at Martigny, Switzerland. After a PhD at EPFL in the Learning Algorithm System lab led by Professor Aude-Biard, Sylvain was head of the Learning and Interaction Lab at the Italian Institute of Technology, Genova, Italy, before joining IDIAP and holding a lecturer position at EPFL now. Focusing on human-centered robotics application, Sylvain's main research areas are optimal control, human-robot collaboration, model-based optimal control, and most of all, one of his main and key research direction is about skill learning from few demonstrations by exploiting geometric structure beyond the Euclidean geometry and data, for example, using Riemann geometric algebra for unifying geometric reasoning on both objects and transformations in robotics. Today's talk will be exactly on this topic, namely about robot learning from few demonstrations by exploiting the structure and the geometry of data.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and for the introduction. I will use this one, it's fine. Yes, so I come from the IDIAP Research Institute. It's about 150 persons working in the field of machine learning. We are in the Swiss Alps, and we have these 16 research groups. We have also this affiliation with EPFL, so that PhD students have affiliation with both IDIAP and EPFL. In this 16 research group, I'm heading the Robot Learning and Interaction Lab, which was created 9 years ago. And we have expertise in manipulation skills in general. We want to transfer manipulation skills to robots. And here I have a few videos to showcase some of the challenges that we are targeting. So in the first video, you can see some examples of whole body contact, with the challenge of not using only the end effector of the robot, but the full body of the robot to manipulate objects. On the right side, you see an example involving discrete and continuous variables that we need to learn, which is the case with task and motion planning, and also it's the case when we decide or not to use a tool in this scenario of stacking blocks. The video below is showing some examples of using learning from demonstration as a way to reprogram these robots more easily. In this example, it's annotation. So the user is here to annotate some parts of the objects, and then we have a generalization to new objects or to new locations of the same objects that are being done through these demonstrations. On the right part of this slide, you see another kind of works that we are tackling. It's the shared control aspect. So there are also challenges when we think about teleoperation. Here in this case, you have the example of a robot being an underwater robot that we need to teleoperate from a teleoperation center. And for this kind of challenges, we're also developing techniques so that we have mapping between the teleoperation center and the robot. Here you see the video at the bottom that is the lab-based experiment. And you see in this mapping that we have some automatic retargeting of the movement with respect to different valves that can be located differently within the environment. And for this underwater robot, this is something very useful because it means that if there is perturbation, the teleoperator doesn't necessarily need to know about the perturbation as long as the task is fulfilled. So it's why it's a shared control aspect. It's really a human-robot collaboration challenge. Another aspect of our work is related also to non-prehensile manipulation. So here we tested different ways of pushing objects with different models. Here you can see some examples of these models with targets that are either moving and we need fast adaptation of the robot, or in the center you have an example where we use multiple contact points and switching between these contact points. This work will be presented by Suhan tomorrow in the poster session, so I will not talk about it too much. And on the right side, some DQN as a way to have the robot pushing objects within a box. so to gather objects and push these objects within a box. The first approach that I'm showing here, that is related to stochastic optimization, 2 students in my group have been using that for the HeroKey challenge that Jan mentioned this morning. And currently we are ranked first. So if things don't change, then we are succeeding very well in this challenge by using the same techniques as the work that you see above called VPSTO. Then we are also collaborating with other groups. Here I'm showing 2 examples with the Chinese University of Hong Kong, here in the context of soft object manipulation, by using a combination of classic optimal control techniques, transformers, and graph neural networks. Here in my group, we have the expertise mostly on the first aspect, that is the optimal control and optimization aspects. And in this case, the idea was to handle this soft object by cutting, by rolling DO, so something that we cannot really describe with a standard state space. And at the bottom, you see some examples, including a collaboration with the Joseph Stefan Institute in Slovenia about robots assisting people. And here, the robot is assisting someone to stand up and sit down. And on the right side, we have a robot acting as a coach. And all of these tasks involve not only movement, but also force interaction and impedance behaviors to be considered. So that's an overview about the challenges that we are tackling in our group. And today I would like to focus on 2 specific techniques that I would like to detail more. The first one is about tensor networks or tensor factorization. The second one will be about geometry, how to add geometric structures. So in this talk, I will use the term structures. I could also have used the term representations or inductive bias. So here what I mean by this is that we need to find good representations that can still allow us to generalize the skills to new situations and to new robots, but to try to see like what can we put as prior knowledge that is strong enough in order to learn by reducing the amount of data. So in our group, we are focusing on learning from small amount of data, either from demonstrations or from exploration trials. So I will start with the first one. So first, an observation is that we have a lot of tensor data structures in robotics. Sometimes it's directly the data itself being organized in a tensor form, and here I'm providing some examples. Sometimes it's in the form of a function. So here, if you think of these cube of data, and now if you think of these 3 dimensions as 3 dimensions of a function, then it means that we also have this kind of structure when we want to optimize for a function having 3 decision variables. So here what I mean by this is that if we discretize this domain, then we can also represent the problem like that, and each of these voxels here will be the value of this function. And in our case, as you will see next, we will use that for global optimization. So the function will be some cost or some score. So first, let's see what we can do with the tools available. So first, my takeaway message is that we should be very careful about when we are flattening data or vectorizing data. When we do that, we are losing a lot of structures. And here I will just illustrate that with this example. If I'm taking this cube, and if this cube is just translated from top to bottom. Now imagine that we try to represent this data, but in this 2D plane. So if you try to have a model explaining what's happening here, then you have something very complicated, especially if you look at it in as a shape, because you have a shape that is changing, that is growing, that is changing the number of faces. So it's something that would be very inefficient to process. And sometimes when we are flattening or vectorizing our data, this is exactly the problem that we are facing. So another tool, obviously, that we can use for that is all of these tools related to neural networks. So here, if we think of it as processing graphs, there are a lot of options that we have as structures that we can use to treat this tensor data. But there is one that is maybe less known, at least in the field of robotics, is the field of tensor networks. So it's a tool being used a lot in physics and in applied mathematics. It's getting more and more popular in machine learning, but in robotics, there are a lot of ways of using this kind of structures. And this is what I wanted to highlight today with one work that we are conducting in our group. And to motivate that, I will take the example of this function approximation problem. So where these voxels that we were seeing before were part of a function with multiple dimensions. So if we have only 2 dimensions, we already know how to do that. It's related to the problem of separating the function as a product of 2 functions. In this case, if we are lucky, we could separate this. The variables could be independent, and we would get a rank 1 decomposition. In reality, we rarely have that. We will more likely have some low-rank decomposition. So if we try to extract the underlying structures of the data, if we try to extract the essential information out of this and to denoise the data, we will typically have something that would be represented as a sum of a product. Or if we use linear algebra, we can decompose that in the same way as we use PCA or singular value decomposition. But the story is that we can extend that to any dimensions. And here it's becoming more interesting. And this is the field of tensor methods and tensor networks. In this case, it's called a canonical polyadic decomposition. But there are many other techniques that can be used. It's much richer than in the 2D case. In the 2D case, everything boils down to singular value decomposition, if we look at it from a linear perspective. But with more dimensions, we have different techniques that can be used. And the field of tensor method is exploring what to do with these different decomposition techniques. And there are different groups being specialized in one or the other method. For robotics, the one that we believe is the most interesting one is this last one, called tensor train. So it's a decomposition technique with these different tensor cores that are representing a low-rank decomposition of the data. And if we have 4-dimensional data, we will have 4 vagons. So here the term train means really like a train of tensor cores. So let's see what we can do with this. So many optimization problems in robotics boils down to generating, like to start from an initial guess and to refine this guess until we find a local optimum, and we hope that this local optimum is a global optimum. So here, this is just a sketch of that. If we use optimal control, we will have a lot of decision variables. Sometimes it can be over a time window, so a lot of dimensions. We start from an initial guess, and we use Newton-based methods that will let us converge to the closest local optimum. So here what's difficult is to find this local optimum. It's very important to start from a good guess. And here it's where the tensor factorization techniques can come into play. What we will do in this case is to take a discrete version of this problem, so to discretize these variables that we need to optimize, and use this discrete world in order to find these regions that looks important to initialize the solver. And the good news is that we can use these tensor train techniques to do that. So let's see what we do. So in practice, we use something called cross approximation. That is a way to approximate data by using a subset of rows and columns of the same data. So if it's 2D data, we will use here only the values that are colored here as an approximation of our original data. And we will use that where our data is a function, so it's a score. It's a score that we get, and we are interested in having these regions that are high scores that are corresponding to these gray regions. So the algorithm is working like that. It will query rows and columns alternatively until convergence in an iterative manner. In 2D, it doesn't look impressive because it's nearly covering all of the data. So it's trying in some way nearly everything. But the good point is that the more dimensions you have, the sparser this querying will be. And this is exactly what is relevant for us, is that this, when we extend it to tensor trains, it means we can find this probability distribution, in our case, in a very fast way. So it's a function approximation technique that is quite generic and that is exploiting the low rank form of the functions that we provide as input. So let's see here with some animations how it works. So if we have only rank 1, what it means is that we will test a full row here to see with different decision variables for the first decision variable to test what scores it gives. And this is informing us that this point here looks the best. So maybe we will next query this given column. So for rank 1, we can use that. It's like an alternating optimization scheme that would guide us toward one solution. But more interestingly, we can do that, but by querying more rows and columns. And the algorithms here related to cross-approximation will estimate the rank while querying these rows and columns. So if I'm giving an example with rank 3, it means that we will we'll start with an estimate with 3 rows, then look at the data that has the best score. In this case, it's a max volume algorithm. We look at the determinant of this matrix represented with the green pixels here. And this is informing us that these 3 yellow columns are promising. And we do that iteratively. Here I'm showing only two iterations. And when we do that, it means that we have a low rank representation of our distribution with multiple solutions. The other advantage that we have, so there is this aspect that we can generalize this to any dimensions, but we also have a way to sample for these solutions in a very efficient way. Instead of reconstructing the full distribution, what we can do is to sample by using this tensor train structure. And this is what we do to solve our problem of global optimization. We will sample for solutions by privileging samples that have high scores. So we view the scores as a probability distribution, and the sampling can be either standard sampling or it can also be conditional sampling. With conditional sampling for robotics, the advantage is that we can also include task parameters. So we can have decision variables, which is what the robot will do. You can think of it as actions that the robot will perform. And the task parameters would be the situation, like it will describe the environment in which the robot is. And the conditional sampling means that for a new situation, we want to generate some actions, and we will use these sampling techniques to do that. So let's jump to concrete examples with robotics. So we tested that with robots having obstacles and having to solve inverse kinematics tasks, target reaching tasks, or pick and place tasks, always with obstacles. So tasks looking like that. This is an example in 2D with a planar robot with obstacles. That would be inverse kinematics. The second one would be a pick and place task on a shelf. And the third one would be an example of a reaching task. And what we do is to use some solver to do that. So here in this case, a Newton type algorithm. But we initialize this solver either from uniform sampling, which are the results you see in the table, or with this TTGO technique. And as you can see with the success rate, it's much better to get better initial guess by using the TTGO technique, being used in combination with a standard solver. And so these are results that already look promising. But the other promising results that we are currently investigating is the fact that since we discretize the data, we also have the opportunity to directly include discrete decision variables. So it means that we can search for solutions where some part of the data will be continuous and some part of the data will be discrete. And we have a lot of challenges in robotics that are formulated like that. If you need to decide if you use a tool or not, if you have multiple objects and you need to decide which object you want to use. It's sometimes called TAMP, for Task on Motion Planning. So that's something that we are currently investigating. Something else that we are investigating is to have the human in the loop, because this cross-approximation algorithm is allowing the user to jump in the process and give guidance to the robot. If it's guidance on the decision variables, it means we are demonstrating some task to the robot. If it's guidance at the level of the task parameters, it means that we have some form of curriculum learning. We are scaffolding the environment so that the robot can learn faster, by starting with some easy examples and progressively moving toward more complicated and challenging scenarios. So this is also another ongoing work. Now let me show you a second use case where TensorTrain can be useful. Completely different story here. Here we are talking about ergodic control, which is a control technique that where you give as input a spatial distribution which represents the areas you would like to explore, and the output is a controller. So that's the setup. Then the mechanisms behind is to make a Fourier series decomposition of the spatial distribution that you provided, as well as on the path that the robot has already covered. And the goal for the robot is to have these two spectral patterns to be the same. So what it means is we have a very simple cost function that is only quadratic. It's just trying to have the Fourier series coefficients being the same. So this is working super well when you have 2D data or 3D data. So if you think of a planar robot or a robot that needs to a mobile robot that is viewed from the top, this is okay. But when we think of manipulation skills, the problem is that we need exploration for both position and orientation. So here at minimum we have 6 degrees of freedom. And the problem is when you do naively this spectral decomposition or this spectral analysis, it means that you cannot scale. It's too big to scale. So we need to find a way to extract the essential information out of this. And here TensorTrain is also very helpful to find this low-rank decomposition of these Fourier basis functions. And this is what you see as a result on the video. So as input, we have demonstrations to show to the robot the regions that we would like to explore. So here it's an insertion point. And on the right side, on the video, you see that even if we don't have a very good sensor that is only providing some rough information about this entry point, then by using ergodic control, we can have the robot doing the task by having some exploration. So the robot is wiggling around the target in order to fulfill the task. So the next part of my presentation will be another kind of inductive bias, another kind of representation or structures that is related to geometry. So it can be put in the category of physical inductive bias, but it's not using, let's say, the full physics view of it. It's only using the geometric view. And here I will show 2 techniques that we are investigating. It's 2 frameworks. It's very general frameworks in geometry. The first one is the Riemannian manifold. The Riemannian manifold, you can view this as local approximations of your data as tangent spaces. So if you think of data being on a sphere, a tangent space would be, for a given point on the sphere, would be some plane that would touch the sphere. But it's not only plane, depending on the data that you have different kind of tangent spaces. And what Riemannian manifold is doing is basically having a mapping between this tangent space on your manifold. And with many data in robotics, we have explicit mapping. So here, this is something that we investigate in our group, is that here I'm giving quite a lot of different kind of structures that we find in robotics, and they all have an explicit mapping. So it means that if you have an algorithm that works for standard Euclidean data or Cartesian data, it means it's possible to adapt this algorithm so that it will work with this notion of tangent spaces. So here I'm giving in this example some kind of mixture modeling challenge about clustering data point by fitting a mixture of two Gaussians to the data. And I'm doing that for orientation data. I'm doing that for symmetric positive definite matrices. We find this when we have ellipsoids. So I will give an example next, but it can be stiffness, inertia, centroidal momentum, gains. It can also be data that you process, such as graph Laplacians or kernel matrices. The next example is about trees and graphs that also have an hyperbolic embedding that can also be useful in robotics. And the last one is related to constraints, to projection operators, to null spaces, and also to some geometric objects that we find in our environment, such as planes and lines. So we believe that there is a good opportunity here to extend what we do every day when we are tracking an orientation with a robot, but to extend that to also other kinds of data that we are facing in robotics. And the only example I will give here is the one related to manipulability ellipsoid. Manipulability ellipsoid is representing the region that the robot can reach with the end effector or with other points on the kinematic chain. And the shape is telling us which directions are preferred. So depending on the joint angle configurations, it will be easier to move in some directions compared to others. So it means that we have here a descriptor that is in task space, but that is taking some information about the joint angle configuration. So we believe it's a useful descriptor because we don't need to have access to the full kinematic chain. We have something only in task space, but it's still much more informative than just thinking about the position and orientation of the robot hand. And we demonstrated that by exploiting data sets that were from human recorded data. And we transferred the skill to a robot having a completely different kinematic chain. In this case, it was a centaur. By this difference, by taking into account manipulability ellipsoids, we could do much better than just trying to solve the problem by taking as data the position and orientation of the hands. I was saying I had only an example, I have actually a second example. This one is related to learning from demonstration by providing a dictionary of candidate coordinate systems. So in this work, we also use the Riemannian manifold strategy by providing explicitly like 3 different ways of encoding the data. And by doing that, we can get statistics with these different coordinate systems that will try to explain what's happening. And if you have multiple demonstrations, you don't need that many to understand that some coordinate systems will be better than others. And it will typically be related to the shapes of the object you are handling, so to the symmetries that you have in your object, or the symmetries that you have in your action. So if you think of a book, there is no cylinder directly as the shape of the object, but when you turn the pages, you can think of the task and of the variations that you have to turn the pages in a cylindrical coordinate system. So here what you see on the video is this being applied in a shared control problem where the robot is doing part of the job and the person is doing the other part of the job. So here it's typically the person bringing the robot toward the object, and the robot will automatically adapt the position and orientation of the gripper to do the task efficiently. So what it means in practice is that we can introduce perturbations, but the robot will react to the perturbations only if they have an impact due to the symmetry of the object, by exploiting the symmetry of the objects. So that's for Riemannian manifolds. More recently, we have also been investigating another of this geometric framework called geometric algebra. And the two are complementary. In geometric algebra, we are working in a higher dimensional space. We are working in a 16-dimensional space. But in this this 16-dimensional space, we can represent a variety of geometric objects. We can represent spheres, we can represent points, planes, lines. And the good point behind this is that if we write a function that is, for example, an interpolation function to move from one line to another line or from one point to another point, then this function will be exactly the same whatever object you provide. So it means that it's in some way a different way of programming robots. With standard linear algebra, we often need to have a lot of use cases. We have a lot of if-then. So if I have a line on a point, I will run this code. If I have a point that I need to transform into a plane, I will run this code. So there are a lot of code to provide, also a lot of mistakes that can be done, while here it's a much more concise way of describing this within this 16-dimensional space. And the practical applications for robots are quite large because these geometric objects can represent constraints that we would like. It can be pointing constraints, it can be keeping a distance to an object, it can even be options, several options that you might have. So here what you see here is all of this is coded in a uniform way. So that's what it can provide. And it's fast. So it's competitive compared to other techniques that would be more standard, that would typically decouple the orientation data from the position data. And when you do that, the problem is you need conversions. And these conversions are actually computationally expensive. So it's why here, even if we are in a 16-dimensional space, we can compete with frameworks that have been well-tuned to be fast. If you want more information, you have this website gathering these different experiments. So as a conclusion, the two techniques that I presented, the first one is related to tensor trains. And my takeaway message is that it can be used in complement of reinforcement learning, especially if we want to have small sample size. It can also be used for global optimization problems by finding multiple solutions, which is better for versatility. So it means that if the robot is stuck because someone is coming and it's creating an obstacle, when we have multiple options, it means we can react to the perturbations in a better way. It's also facilitating human-in-the-loop learning by having the user being part of the algorithm. And in the second part of my presentation, I discussed geometric structures and how it can be used to reduce the set of interactions, either from the users or with the environment, with the goal of providing descriptors that can be used in many different kinds of robotics problems. These are the persons behind this work. And while answering questions, I will just run this video that is a typical Swiss example of using learning from demonstrations and learning by correction, and I will let you discover what the video is all about. And I'm happy to take questions.
Oh. Maybe I should the video finish or whatever. Makes me hungry. Let's see. Yeah, I have a question related to the difference between matrix and tensor decomposition. So in matrix decomposition, we have easy way of having for any rank R the guaranteed best decomposition of rank R. I thought, and maybe I'm completely wrong, I thought that property disappears completely with tensors. Is that true?
No, it's partly. So, so it's not the same definition of low-rank decomposition. Okay. The complete story is that it's possible to have low rank that are different for each dimension of the tensor. And here it's this that we don't have when we have data as a matrix. So with data as a matrix, there is only one way of doing that. When we have more dimensions, we have, let's say, different notions about a low-rank decomposition. One way to view that is to think of it as a sum of product that would estimate a function. Here what it means is that there are different ways of viewing a sum of products. And it's why there are these different kinds.
That's multiple decomposition depending on the combination of ranks. Each of them is still guaranteed to be the best one given that combination of ranks.
Yeah, so for each of these models, indeed, like if you set this as the framework, then the technique will be the only decomposition.
Right, so the follow-up is the thing I missed is how do you choose that combination of ranks then?
So that's the hard part. So for some of these techniques, it's based on alternating optimization scheme. Some of them are not very robust in the sense that they can be sometimes quite inefficient. With TensorTrain, there is this cross-approximation mechanism that is relatively new, so it has not been investigated theoretically entirely, but here mathematicians are working on that. Currently, it's more about observations, that the convergence is very good, and that you can start with initial guesses that are random, and it's providing a function approximation that is in practice working well.
So it's a two-step process, right? Sorry, this is the last
remark. But
I don't want to hog the microphone. But it's kind of a two-step process then, right? There's a first step to find the combination of ranks, and then the second step is to actually use that decomposition.
It's done at the same time. So when running the iteration, it's also trying to increase the rank progressively.
Okay, I have another question. One of the apparent limitation is to rely on some discretization of your variable space, which seems to be a very hard limitation, especially in robotics. So for example, with in friction contact-rich functions, you have very strong discontinuities. So for example, where it seems very hard to discretize and even to have an adaptive granularity to discretize your data. So what's your opinion about, is it a real limit?
So when we discover these techniques from applied mathematics, this is the first thing that we are thinking. We are thinking, okay, we have continuous data, maybe it's not the right fit. But something that we also noticed is that we have excellent mechanisms that start from an initial guess and that will converge to a solution. So we have very good solvers, most of the time based on first order or second order optimization techniques. And these ones we are very happy with. The only thing we are not happy with is that we need to start from some regions, some attracting regions that is still close enough to our solution. And if we think of it as in this context, then here it's completely fine to discretize. As long as we have a resolution that is still allowing us to be in this attracting region, in this solution space, then we are fine. And this cross-approximation mechanism is working much better when we have kind of a crude discretization of our data. So that's the best setting we can.
Okay, so it's typically used in combination with.
Always, I would say always.
Okay,
at least for robotics.
And an obvious extension is, so you are speaking about global optimization as our optimization problem was a single point of optimization problem. In robotics, it's even a sequential optimization where the variable is a plan, so a sequence of variables. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so in the example I showed, I showed some examples where things were static, like inverse kinematics would be a static problem where I want to find a configuration that will reach the target I want and that is avoiding obstacles. But I also showed examples that were full trajectories. So in this case, what we did is first to also use a good representation of a trajectory. So in this case, we use movement primitives that we discussed several times today. So we use that as a way to encode a movement as a set of weights that are sequential. And in this case, these weights are just different dimensions that we are considering. So when we have a sequential problem, here the way it's viewed is that it's just more dimensions in your tensor. So it's still possible to treat this kind of problem by using tensor trains.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very clear. Are there any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I also have a question regarding these tensor trains, or two. One would be, it seems you kind of try to model kind of probability distribution of a variable. So then I'm wondering, do you have examples where it might not be a good tool to use? Like, because I guess the method puts some biases into that, and there will be some worst case problems.
Yeah, so the cases where it might not be appropriate is if you don't have this kind of low rank decomposition being possible. So there are still some problems where you don't have such kind of, the data or functions are so complicated that you cannot really decompose the data in this way. So that would be one cases where we would have difficulty to find a proper low rank solution. The other one is more a misuse, I would say, of this technique. It would be to discretize at a very fine grain. So here, what works best is to have something like some kind of, let's say, 10 discretization steps per dimension. The number of dimensions can be very high, but the discretization steps should not be too high. Here, if it's too high, there is the risk that the random point that you start with in your cross approximation might not find the good location of your high-score regions in the process. So it still needs, it's a function approximation tool. It still needs to be, I would say, to have some, we need to get used to it in some way. The same way as with a mixture model or with a neural network, there is still a lot of know-how about how many transitions we need, what kind of structures we need. So I would argue that tensor train, you have different kind of hyperparameters, but the good news is that they are quite interpretable because these are easier to set because it's directly something meaningful compared to the data that you have. So I think we still need to craft guidelines about how to use this function approximation tool. But once again, it's quite recent technique, so there are a lot of things that can be done in this direction.
And maybe a short second question, how does it compare? So I would personally just use a Gaussian process with some Bayesian optimization. How does it compare to these like established methods?
So it would be good to compare, but as a first guess, I think that it would be much faster. Here when we are sampling, we are thinking of really like 1 to 10 milliseconds as sampling time. So it's something that we are really running on the robot on the fly. And so my first guess is that we might have a better decomposition of what can be done offline as the cross-approximation algorithm and what needs to be done online as the conditional sampling. But it's just an early guess. It would need to be compared more carefully.
Thank you very much. Just two questions about the discretization. You compared it, that's the tensor train I'm talking about. You compared it to like second order optimization, that the second order optimization, they need like an initial before they can start. But isn't that kind of the same with the tensor train? Because in your discretization, you would need to have like a range of your decision variable that you discretize within. So kind of having to know the range of this discretization is kind of akin to having like an initial solution in the case of second order, I would guess. And then my second question would be...
Oh, maybe I will completely forget about the first one. Okay. If you don't mind, I will answer the first.
I should say the first again?
No. But before you ask the second, I will answer the first. So yeah, so here what we need indeed is, it's actually the second point. It means that we need some discretization. So currently we tested only very crude discretization that is just homogeneously splitting the space. So here it still means we need to know what's the minimum and maximum value that we expect. In robotics, often we have access to that because when we think of joint angles, we have actually joint angle limits. So this is, in robotics, not very difficult to set. In other problems where you have no idea about this range, then this can be a problem. And here probably you would need other algorithms that could make maybe this region grow. But it's a first guess. then the kind of discretization that you use here in some way, like it's a very naive discretization. It would be better to also have stronger algorithms that would discretize this continuous data in a better way. Here I'm referring maybe to hidden Markov models. It's well known that when we are discretizing some output variables, that we have a way to encode this as a vector quantization that is much more powerful than just naively splitting the data in homogeneous bins. So here there are also quite a lot of things to explore. Here we just use the naive discretization technique.
Then I was also just going to ask, any idea how to incorporate like inequality constraints in this DTO? I understand it's still new, so I don't know how you go about like enforcing constraints such as that, inequalities and stuff like that.
Yes, that's a good question. That's an excellent question. So here, one way, since we have after that a solver, one way is to think of the inequality constraints as soft constraints, so to have costs described as a soft inequality constraint, and to rely on what comes next to really have strict guarantee that this constraint is satisfied. So here again, it's like if we start from an initial guess that is close enough to the good solutions, then here, depending on the solver that you use, this solver might cope with these inequality constraints well. But it's also like, I would say, work in progress. And maybe Swan also tomorrow, if you go to his poster, I think he will also like discuss about that.
We are getting a bit run of time. But a very last question, maybe embarrassing, but it's a question I wanted to ask you since a lot of months, which is, I really liked your geometric algebra. I think it's very elegant, a lot of advantage. I'm just questioning, why is this framework not more widely adopted?
So, you know, the way we learned about that is actually from the field of computer graphics. And something that we didn't realize is that in the field of computer graphics, this was really becoming exponentially popular. And we noticed that it's exactly also what we need in robotics. I would even claim that it's maybe even more useful to robotics than to computer graphics. And some people in computer graphics presenting work are actually saying, this is good, but we hope that we will see other applications using that. And I think that robotics is a perfect field to study this further. What's a bit complicated is you need to unlearn. It's a technique where you need to unlearn what you know about quaternions, about maybe dual quaternions, and understand what's this new story, because it's linked to that. It's actually, I think, a better story, and it's also much more easy to get, but it needs quite a lot of unlearn. And there are some papers explaining historically why it happened that Clifford algebra, so it's related to geometric algebra, why Clifford algebra was put on the side, and why it's coming back now, at least in computer graphics.
Okay. Thanks a lot for these very clear answers, and once again, thank you very much.